Garrett Stone's hands were still shaking when Naira pressed her palm against his face and said the words that would reshape everything he thought he knew about second chances. Her daughter had been dying in his arms just hours before, fever burning through her small body like wildfire, and he'd stayed awake through the darkness doing what any decent man would do. He never expected payment. He sure as hell never expected this. But when a desperate woman looks you in the eye and says, "I choose you to be the father," you don't just walk away, even if you should. Before we dive into Garrett and Naira's story, if you love tales of frontier courage, impossible choices, and love that defies every odd hit that subscribe button right now, stay with me until the very end of this journey. You won't believe where it takes us. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. Now let's begin. 4 days before everything changed, Garrett Stone was checking the water level in his cattle tank when he saw the buzzards circling over the eastern ridge. 3 of them riding the thermals in that patient spiral that meant something was dying slow, or already dead. He stood there for a long moment, one hand shading his eyes against the brutal New Mexico sun, the other resting on the fence post he'd been meaning to replace for 6 months. His first instinct was to ignore it. Buzzards circled over dying things all the time out here. Coyotes, cattle, sometimes men who'd made bad decisions about water and distance. None of it was his business. Not anymore. But then the wind shifted, and he caught movement in his peripheral vision. Something dark against the pale sand, too deliberate to be shadow. He watched it for another minute, that shape struggling across the hardpan like something already half dead trying to convince itself otherwise. His second instinct was still to ignore it. Then the shape split in two, and he realized it wasn't one person. It was 2, one carrying the other. "God damn it," he said to no one and reached for his rifle. The walk to the ridge took 20 minutes, and by the time he got close enough to see details, he'd already decided this was going to end badly. It always did when strangers showed up half dead on your property, especially in a territory where Apache raids and settler violence had turned everyone into someone's enemy. The woman saw him coming from 50 yards out. She stopped moving immediately, which told him she still had survival instincts despite the exhaustion written into every line of her body. She set down the child she'd been carrying because that's what the second shape was. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and her hand went to her waist. Garrett raised one hand, the other keeping the rifle pointed at the ground, not threatening, but not unarmed either. "I ain't looking for trouble," he called out. The woman didn't respond. Her hand stayed where it was, resting on what he now saw was a blade sheathed at her belt. She was Apache, he could tell from the doeskin dress and the way she'd braided her hair. Young, maybe late 20s, with the kind of lean strength that came from a hard life lived without complaint. The child hadn't moved. She lay in the dust where the woman had set her down, her chest rising and falling too fast, her lips cracked and bleeding. Garrett took 3 steps closer and stopped when the woman's fingers tightened on the blade. "Water," he said, nodding toward the canteen on his belt. "That's all, just water." The woman's eyes narrowed. She was calculating something, weighing risks and possibilities, with the kind of cold assessment that meant she'd been making life-or-death decisions long enough to be good at it. Then the child made a sound, a weak, broken whimper that cut through the silence like a cry that couldn't quite form itself into words. The woman's jaw tightened. Whatever calculation she'd been doing, that sound had just changed the equation. "Water?" Garrett said again, quieter this time. "And shade. Real shade, not this." He gestured at the scraggly mesquite they'd collapsed under. "Why?" The woman's voice was rough, like she hadn't used it in days. Her English was good, though, better than he'd expected. "Because she's a child," Garrett said. "And children don't die for things they didn't do." The woman stared at him for a long moment, and Garrett felt the weight of that stare like something physical. She was measuring him, trying to figure out if he meant it or if this was some kind of game. He kept his hands where she could see them and waited. Finally she spoke. "You give water, then we go." "Fair enough." He crouched down slow, uncapping the canteen with deliberate movements so she could track everything he did. He held it out toward her, not toward the child. Trust had to start somewhere, even if it got you killed. The woman snatched the canteen from his hand and knelt beside the girl, pressing it to her cracked lips. The child drank in desperate gulps, water spilling down her chin, her small hands coming up to clutch at the canteen like it might disappear. When it was empty, the woman handed it back without looking at him. Her attention stayed fixed on the child, one hand pressed against the girl's forehead. "She's burning up," Garrett said. "I know." "How long?" 2 days. 2 days in this heat with a fever. The child was already dying. They both knew it. Garrett stood slowly. "My ranch is 40 minutes west. There's a well of bed salt for the fever, if you want it." The woman turned to look at him, then really look at him, and what he saw in her eyes made his chest tighten. It wasn't hope. It was something harder than that. Something that looked like the moment before surrender, when you've fought so long you've forgotten what winning even means. "Why you help?" she asked. "Your people don't help mine." "Maybe not," Garrett said. "But I ain't my people, and she ain't hers. She's just a child who needs help, and I reckon I've got some to give." The woman studied him for another few seconds, then gathered the child into her arms and stood. She swayed slightly, and Garrett realized she wasn't much better off than the girl. He started walking west without checking to see if she followed. Behind him, after a pause that felt like an eternity, he heard footsteps in the dust. Slow, unsteady, but following. The walk back to the ranch took twice as long as it should have. The woman kept stopping, adjusting the child in her arms, her legs threatening to give out with every few steps. Garrett wanted to offer to carry the girl himself, but he knew better. Trust wasn't something you rushed, especially not with someone who'd already pulled a blade on you once. So he walked ahead slow enough that she could keep pace and pretended not to notice when she stumbled. His ranch sat in a shallow valley, tucked against a rock face that provided shade in the afternoon. It wasn't much weathered adobe walls, a tin roof that leaked when the rare rains came, a corral that needed mending. But it had walls and a well that still gave water, and right now that was worth more than gold. The woman stopped at the property line, staring at the house like it might be a trap. "Nobody else here," Garrett said without turning around. "Just me. Has been for 3 years." She didn't move. The child stirred in her arms, making that same broken sound again, and that seemed to decide it. She crossed onto his land, but her hand never left the blade at her waist. Inside the house was dark and 15 degrees cooler than the brutal heat outside. Garrett gestured toward his bed, the only one he had pushed against the far wall. "Put her there." The woman laid the child down with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the hardness in her eyes. She brushed matted hair from the girl's forehead, and Garrett saw her hand tremble. He brought more water, a cloth, and the last of his salt. The woman watched him mix the salt into the water, her eyes sharp and suspicious, like she was waiting for him to add something else. Poison, maybe, or worse. When he held the cup toward her, she took it, but didn't let the child drink. Instead, she tasted it first, just a sip waiting. "It's just salt water," Garrett said quietly. "Helps with fever." The woman didn't respond. She pressed the cup to the child's lips, coaxing her to drink in small sips. And for the first time since he'd found them, something in her expression softened. Not much. Just enough to show that underneath all that suspicion and anger, there was fear. The kind of fear that came from watching someone you loved slip away and not being able to stop it. Garrett stepped back, giving them space. He busied himself at the stove, building a small fire to boil more water. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable, until the woman finally spoke. "Why you live alone?" Garrett glanced over his shoulder. "Long story." "We have time." He turned back to the fire. "Did they—" The child looked bad. Real bad. But maybe if he kept the woman talking, kept her distracted, she wouldn't notice how scared he was, that this girl might die in his bed before morning. "Had a wife," he said finally. "Emma. She died 3 years back. Childbirth. Baby too. I'm sorry." Yeah, me too. The woman was quiet for a moment, then softer. My husband died 8 months ago. Garrett looked at her then. How? They say hunting accident. Her voice went flat. Arrow through the leg got infected. He was dead in 5 days. That's rough. Yes. She paused, wringing out the cloth she'd been using to cool the child's forehead. But I think it was not accident. Garrett set down the pot he'd been holding. You saying someone killed him? I'm saying the arrow was placed very careful, and the man who found him, my husband's cousin, he wanted our land. Wanted me. Her hands stilled on the cloth. 2 weeks after funeral, the elders tell me I must marry this cousin. It is tradition. The brother or cousin takes the widow, keeps the family together. And you said no. I said no. She looked at him, and there was steel in her gaze. I saw how he treated his first wife. I saw the bruises she tried to hide. So I said no, and they gave me 3 days to change my mind. And when you didn't, they sent us away, said I was no longer part of the tribe, that Kaya and I, she gestured to the child, would have to survive on our own. Garrett absorbed that. So, you've been out here alone for how long? 6 days. 6 days in the desert with a child and no supplies. And they'd made it this far. That took strength most men didn't have. What's your name? He asked. Naira. Garrett Stone. She nodded once, then turned her attention back to Kaya, and the conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun. By nightfall, Kaya's fever hadn't broken. If anything, it had gotten worse. Garrett didn't sleep. He sat in the chair beside the bed, changing the cloth on Kaya's forehead every few minutes, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Naira had finally collapsed near the window, exhaustion winning over her need to stay alert. But even in sleep, her hand rested on the blade at her side. The fever burned through the child like wildfire. Kaya's skin was so hot it hurt to touch, and every breath she took sounded wet and labored like something inside was drowning. Garrett had seen this before. Winter after Emma died, sickness had swept through the territory and taken half the children in the nearest settlement. He knew how it ended if the fever didn't break by morning. He pressed the cool cloth to Kaya's neck, her wrists behind her knees, anywhere the blood ran close to the surface. His hands moved with a gentleness that felt strange after so many years of working alone, of touching nothing softer than leather and wood. The girl stirred once, her eyes opening, just slightly unfocused and glassy. Mama. She whispered the word, barely forming. She's right there, Garrett said quietly, nodding toward Naira. She's resting. You rest too. Kaya's eyes closed again, and Garrett felt something crack in his chest. He'd forgotten how fragile children were, how much space they took up in a room despite their size, how their breathing became the only sound you could hear. Near dawn, Naira woke. She sat up fast, her hand moving to the blade, her eyes searching the room until they found Kaya. When she saw Garrett still sitting there, still changing the cloth, still keeping watch, something in her expression shifted. The suspicion didn't disappear entirely, but it softened around the edges. You've been awake all night, she said. It wasn't a question. Fever's bad, Garrett replied. Can't let it run wild. Naira stood and crossed to the bed, pressing her hand to her daughter's forehead. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, Garrett thought she might cry. But she didn't. She just took the cloth from his hands and continued the work herself, her movements careful and practiced. They sat in silence for a while, both focused on the child between them. Then Naira spoke again, her voice quiet. Her father wanted to teach her to track deer. She was too young, only 6, but he said she had the patience for it. She paused. He never got the chance. Garrett nodded slowly. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. My father wanted me to marry Goyathle, Naira continued. That is my husband's cousin, the one who killed him. You're sure he did it? I am sure, but I cannot prove it. And even if I could, the elders would not listen. Goyathle has powerful friends, My father has ambitions. The marriage would give him what he wants. What does he want? To be chief. Naira's voice went bitter. Goyathli promised him support if I agreed. So my father chose power over truth, chose his future over mine. That's why you're really out here, Garrett said. Not just because you refused the marriage. If I go back, they will force me. They will take Kaya, use her to make me comply. And I will have no choice. She looked at him then, and the fear in her eyes was raw. I thought I was strong enough to survive alone. I thought I could protect her. But the desert doesn't care how strong you are. Garrett looked at Kaya, still burning with fever, still fighting something her small body might not be able to beat. You made it this far, he said. That counts for something. Does it? Naira asked. If she dies because I was too proud to, she ain't gonna die. The words came out harder than he intended, edged with something he hadn't felt in years. Certainty. Or maybe just stubborn refusal to accept the alternative. Naira stared at him. You cannot know that. No, Garrett admitted, but I can damn well try to make sure it doesn't happen. They continued through the morning, taking turns with the cloth, forcing small sips of salt water past Kaya's cracked lips. The sun climbed higher, turning the house into an oven, and still the fever raged. Naira's hands started to shake around midday exhaustion, and fear finally catching up with her. Garrett had to take over again. You need to rest, he said. I cannot. If you collapse, who takes care of her then? Naira stared at him, working through the logic, hating that he was right. Finally, reluctantly, she moved to the chair. But her eyes never left Kaya. An hour later, the fever broke. It happened all at once. Kaya's skin cooled, her breathing evened out, and she fell into what looked like real sleep, instead of the half-conscious struggle she'd been fighting all night. Naira stood so fast, the chair tipped over. Her hands hovered over her daughter like she was afraid to touch her and break whatever spell had made this happen. She's going to be all right, Garrett said, and this time he meant it. Naira turned to look at him. What he saw in her eyes made him take a step back. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't relief. It was something else entirely, something that looked almost like recognition, like she was seeing him for the first time and realizing something that changed everything. She crossed the room in 3 steps and stopped in front of him, close enough that he could feel the heat still radiating from her skin. Her hand lifted, trembling slightly, and pressed against his cheek. Her palm was rough from work, warm from the fever watch, and steady despite the shake. I choose you to be the father, Naira said. The words hung in the air between them, like something solid, like something that couldn't be taken back once spoken. Garrett's first instinct was to step back. His second was to ask if she'd lost her mind from exhaustion. He did neither. He just stood there frozen, with her hand still pressed against his cheek. What? He finally managed. Naira's hand dropped, but her eyes didn't leave his face. I choose you to be the father. For Kaya. For me. She said it like it was the most logical thing in the world. Like proposing to a stranger was something people did every day when their children recovered from fever. I don't understand. I have nothing. Naira said, her voice steady, despite the desperation underneath. No tribe, no family, no way to keep her safe. She gestured toward Kaya. You saved her life. You stayed awake all night for a child you don't know. That means something. That means I'm not a monster, Garrett said. It doesn't mean I'm ready to be a father. The word tasted strange in his mouth. Father. He'd thought he would be one once years ago when Emma was pregnant, and they'd talked about names. But that child had never taken a breath, and Emma had bled out before the doctor could arrive, and the word father had died with them both. You already are, Naira said quietly. You just don't know it yet. Garrett turned away, running a hand through his hair. This was insane. He'd brought them water and shelter because it was the right thing to do, not because he wanted to tie his life to theirs permanently. I can work, Naira continued behind him. I can cook tend animals. I know plants, which ones heal, which ones harm. I can teach Kaya to do the same. We won't be a burden. That ain't what I'm worried about. Then what? Garrett turned back to face her. What happens when you realize you made a mistake? When you figure out you don't want to be stuck out here with some rancher who couldn't even keep his own wife alive? The words came out harder than he meant them to, edged with something bitter he'd buried deep. But Naira didn't flinch. She just looked at him with those dark, unreadable eyes. What happens when you realize you don't want the responsibility? She asked. When you decide we're too much trouble. That's different. Why? Because you're the one taking the risk here. Naira shook her head. I'm risking more than you are. If this doesn't work, I have nowhere to go. No one to turn to. You can walk away any time. I cannot. She was right, and that made it worse somehow. I won't force you, Naira said softer now. If you want us to leave when Kaya is strong enough, we'll go. I'll find another way. She paused. But I'm asking you to consider it, not because I expect anything from you, but because I saw something in you last night. Kindness without conditions, and that's worth more than you know. Garrett looked at Kaya, still sleeping, her small face finally peaceful instead of twisted with fever pain. Then he looked at Naira, standing there with her spine straight and her chin up, despite the fact that she was asking for something most people wouldn't even consider offering. And he thought about the years he'd spent alone in this house. The silence that had become so familiar, he barely noticed it anymore. The way days blurred together into nothing. If I say yes, he said slowly, it ain't because I expect anything from you either. You're not some servant I'm taking in. And there have to be rules. Respect. Boundaries. I agree. You sleep in the bed with Kaya, I'll take the floor. Agreed. No one touches the other without permission. Agreed. And if either of us changes our mind, we talk about it. Honest. No running off in the night. Naira extended her hand. Garrett stared at it for a moment before taking it. Her grip was firm, calloused from work, and steady. It felt like sealing something more permanent than he'd intended. Then we have an arrangement, Naira said. And Garrett wondered, not for the first time, if he'd just made the best decision of his life. Or the biggest mistake. 3 days passed before Garrett understood what he'd actually agreed to. The first morning he woke to the smell of something cooking. Not just heating up, actually cooking with intention and care. He'd been sleeping on the floor near the stove, his back aching from the hard-packed dirt. And for a disoriented moment, he thought Emma was alive again. And this had all been some terrible dream. Then he opened his eyes and saw Naira at his stove, grinding something in his mortar with steady, practiced movements. You're up, she said without turning around. What are you making? Corn mush, with mesquite flour. She glanced at him. You have supplies but no food, just ingredients waiting to become something. Garrett sat up, wincing as his spine cracked. You didn't have to. We have arrangement. I work, you work. Equal. She poured something into the pot. Besides, Kaya needs real food now. Salt water only goes so far. He couldn't argue with that. The girl was still weak, still sleeping more than she was awake, but her fever hadn't returned and her breathing had stayed clear. How is she? He asked. Better. She asked about you. That stopped him. What did she ask? She wanted to know if you were the man who gave her water in the desert. Naira stirred the pot. I said yes. Then she asked if you were going to make us leave now that she wasn't dying. Garrett's chest tightened. What did you tell her? I told her you were a good man who keeps his promises. Naira finally turned to look at him. I hope I wasn't wrong. You weren't. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded and turned back to the stove. Garrett stood and moved to the water basin, splashing his face. The arrangement. Right. They had an arrangement. Boundaries and respect, and all those rules he'd insisted on, like they could keep things simple. Except nothing about this felt simple. That afternoon, he found Naira mending his shirts. All of them. The ones with tears he'd gotten used to, the ones with buttons missing, the ones he'd stopped wearing because they weren't worth the effort. She'd set up near the window, where the light was best, her needle moving with quick efficiency. "You don't have to fix those," Garrett said. "You only have 6 shirts. 4 have holes, 2 are missing buttons. How do you live like this?" "Been managing fine." "Managing isn't living." She bit off a thread. "And I told you I won't be a burden. If I'm staying here, I work." "I'm not asking you to earn your keep, Naira." "I know." She looked up at him. "But I'm asking myself to. There's a difference." He didn't know what to say to that, so he went back outside to work on the corral fence he'd been neglecting for months. An hour later, Kaya appeared in the doorway. She was pale, unsteady on her feet, but upright. That counted for something. "Hello," she said in careful English. Garrett set down his hammer. "Hello yourself. You feeling better?" She nodded, then looked around with wide, curious eyes. "This is your home." "It is." "It's very—" She searched for the word, "quiet." Garrett almost smiled. "Yeah, it is that. At our camp there were always people, always noise." She took a tentative step onto the porch. "I liked the noise. Mama says I talk too much." "Nothing wrong with talking." "You don't talk much." "No, ma'am, I don't." Kaya tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that reminded him painfully of how Emma used to look at him when she was trying to figure something out. "Mama says you saved my life. Your mama did most of the saving. I just had a bed and some salt. She says you stayed awake all night." Garrett picked up his hammer again, uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. Someone had to. "Why you? Why not me?" Kaya considered this. Then, with the blunt honesty of children, "Most white men don't help Apache people." "Yeah, well," Garrett lined up a nail. "Most men do a lot of things that don't sit right with me. You're different." "Maybe." He drove the nail home with 3 solid strikes. "Or maybe I'm just tired of being like everybody else." Kaya smiled at that, and something in Garrett's chest loosened slightly. The girl had her mother's strength, he could see it already, that same steel underneath the surface. "Can I help?" she asked. "You should be resting." "I've been resting for 3 days. I'm tired of resting." Garrett looked at her, then at the fence, then back at her. "You know how to hold a nail steady?" Her smile widened. "I can learn." So he taught her. Showed her how to position the nail, how to hold it firm, but not so tight her hand would hurt when he struck it. She was a quick learner, focused and determined, and by the time Naira called them in for the evening meal, they'd replaced 4 fence posts. "You're good at this," Garrett said as they walked back. "Papa taught me to pay attention. He said watching carefully is how you learn everything." Her face fell slightly. "I wish he could have taught me more." "I'm sorry you lost him." "Mama says bad things happen to good people sometimes, that it's not fair, but it's true." She looked up at Garrett. "Are you good people?" The question was so earnest, so genuine, that Garrett had to stop walking for a second. "I try to be," he said finally. "Don't always succeed, but I try." "I think you are." Kaya said it with the absolute certainty of a child who'd decided something was true. Good people help when they don't have to. Inside, Naira had set out the evening meal on his small table. It wasn't much, the corn mush, some dried meat she'd rehydrated and seasoned with something that made it actually taste like food, but it was more than he'd had in 3 years. More than that, it was people. Voices. The sound of someone else chewing, someone else breathing, someone else existing in the space he'd kept empty for so long. "This is good," he said. Naira glanced at him. "You sound surprised." "I ain't much of a cook myself. This is better than anything I've made in years." "That's not a high bar to clear." Kaya giggled, and Naira's lips quirked slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. They ate in relative silence after that. But it wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence Garrett had gotten used to. It was the comfortable kind. The kind that meant nobody felt the need to fill every second with noise. After dinner, Garrett went outside to check on the horses, while Naira put Kaya to bed. When he came back inside, Naira was standing by the window staring out at the darkness. "She likes you," Naira said without preamble. "She's a good kid. She doesn't like people easily. After her father died, she stopped talking for almost a month." Naira wrapped her arms around herself. "It worried me. I thought maybe she would never speak again. But she did. Yes. One morning she woke up and asked me when Papa was coming home, like she'd forgotten he was gone." Naira's voice went quiet. "I had to tell her again. Watch her remember all over again that he wasn't coming back." Garrett moved to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "That must have been hard." "The hardest thing I've ever done." She paused. "Until now. This, trusting you. Trusting this arrangement." She finally looked at him. "I meant what I said before, about you being kind without conditions, but part of me keeps waiting for the conditions to appear. They won't." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've been on the other end of conditional kindness," Garrett said. "People who help you but hold it over your head, who make you pay in ways that have nothing to do with money." He thought about his father, about the years after his mother died, when every bit of food, every place to sleep came with the unspoken reminder that he owed something. "I swore I'd never be that kind of man." Naira studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would want something in return. Men always want something." "I ain't saying I'm perfect," Garrett said. "But whatever I want, it ain't something you can give me unless you choose to, and I'll never ask for it." "What if I want to give it anyway?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to address. Garrett cleared his throat. "That's your choice to make, when you're ready, if you're ever ready. And if I'm never ready, then that's your choice too." Naira turned back to the window. "You're a strange man, Garrett Stone." "Yeah, well, you're pretty strange yourself, proposing to a man you met 3 days ago." That almost got a smile out of her. Almost. The second day, Garrett woke to find Kaya sitting on the porch steps drawing in the dirt with a stick. "What are you making?" he asked. She looked up. "A house, like this one but bigger." "Bigger, huh? What else would you add?" "A garden, for vegetables, and maybe chickens." She drew some circles. "Mama says we used to have chickens when I was very small before we had to leave them behind." "You like chickens?" "They're funny, and they give eggs." She added more details to her dirt drawing. "Do you have chickens?" "No, but I could get some, I suppose." Kaya's face lit up. "Really?" "Don't see why not. Town's got folks selling them." "Can I help take care of them?" "I'd expect you to. Chickens are a lot of work." She nodded seriously, like he'd just given her an important mission. Then she went back to drawing, adding what looked like tiny chicken shapes to her dirt house. Garrett found himself watching her for a moment, this child who'd been half dead 4 days ago and was now planning chicken coops. Kids were resilient in ways adults forgot how to be. "Garrett," Kaya said without looking up. "Yeah. What do I call you?" The question hit him harder than it should have. He'd been wondering the same thing, wondering what this arrangement meant in practical terms, but hearing it from her made it real. "What do you want to call me?" "I don't know." She drew another circle. "You're not my papa, but Mama says you're—" I don't remember the word she used. "Father." "Yes, but that's the same as papa, isn't it?" "Sort of, but not exactly." Garrett crouched down beside her. "How about you just call me Garrett for now until you figure out what feels right to you?" "Okay, Garrett." She tested the name, then nodded. I like it. It sounds strong. Glad you approve. Do you like being a father? The question was so innocent, so genuine that Garrett didn't know how to answer it. He wasn't sure he was a father yet. Wasn't sure what that even meant in this context. I'm still figuring that out, he said finally. But I like having you here. That's a start. Kaya smiled at that, then went back to her drawing. Inside, Naira was sorting through his meager supplies with the focused intensity of someone planning a military campaign. We need more flour, she said. And beans. Sugar if you can get it. Making a list? Yes. If I'm going to cook real meals, I need real ingredients. She held up a jar of something that might have been edible 3 years ago. What is this? Honestly, I have no idea. When was the last time you went to town? Few months. Few months. She set the jar down with more force than necessary. Garrett, you can't live like this. I've been managing. Managing isn't living. We've established this. She turned to face him. When you go to town for chickens, you're also getting proper food supplies. Yes, ma'am. Something flickered in her expression. Amusement maybe, or satisfaction at being obeyed without argument. Good. Make the list while I figure out what we can salvage from this disaster you call a pantry. Garrett found himself smiling as he pulled out paper and pencil. It had been a long time since someone had bossed him around in his own home. Longer since he'd enjoyed it. That evening, after another meal that actually tasted like food, Naira pulled out a pouch from her belongings. Inside were dried plants, roots, small bundles of herbs Garrett didn't recognize. What's all that? He asked. Medicine, plants for healing. She spread them out carefully. Some I brought from home. Some I found in the desert before we collapsed. You know what they all do. My mother taught me, and her mother taught her. Naira picked up one bundle. This one stops bleeding. This one, she indicated another, helps with pain. This one brings down fever. That what you used on Kaya? Yes, along with your salt water. She looked at him. The salt helped more than you know. Without it, the fever would have taken her. Glad I had some then. Most white men would have let us die. You keep saying that. Because it's true. Naira sorted through her plants. When I was young, a white trader came through our territory. His horse had gone lame and he was stranded. My father gave him food water, helped him fix his horse. 2 weeks later, that same trader brought soldiers to our camp, said we'd stolen from him. Had you? No, but it didn't matter. The soldiers believed him because we were Apache and he was white. She set down the bundle she'd been holding. 3 people died in that raid. One was my mother's sister. Garrett didn't know what to say to that. I'm sorry, felt inadequate, but he said it anyway. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Naira said. I'm telling you so you understand why trust doesn't come easy, why I keep expecting this arrangement to turn into something else. It won't. You can't promise that. Maybe not, but I can promise I'll try. He paused. And if I fail, you can put that blade you carry straight through me. Fair. Naira almost smiled at that. Deal. On the 3rd morning, everything changed. Garrett was teaching Kaya how to measure flour when Naira went still by the window. What is it? He asked. Someone's coming. He crossed to the window following her gaze. 3 riders still distant but heading straight toward the ranch. Your tribe? He asked quietly. Yes. Naira's hand moved to her blade. They've come for me. Kaya looked up from the flour, her eyes going wide. Mama? Go to your room, Naira said without taking her eyes off the riders. Now, Kaya. But, now. The girl scrambled off the chair and disappeared into the back room. Garrett could hear her trying to be quiet, trying not to cry, and failing at both. How long do we have? He asked. 10 minutes, maybe less. Naira's voice had gone flat empty of everything except cold assessment. You should go outside. Meet them before they reach the house. What are you gonna do? Stay inside with Kaya. If they try to take her, they'll have to go through me first. Garrett moved to the corner and pulled out his rifle. He checked the chamber, loaded it, and turned back to Naira. They go through both of us, he said. That was the arrangement, wasn't it? We protect each other. Something shifted in Naira's expression. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition that he'd meant every word he'd said 3 days ago. This could get violent, she said. I know. You could die. Yeah, well, so could you. So could Kaya. He moved toward the door. And I ain't about to let that happen without a fight. Garrett. He stopped, looking back at her. Thank you, Naira said quietly, for keeping your promise. He nodded once, then stepped outside. The 3 riders were closer now, close enough to see their faces. The man in the center was older, maybe 40, with scars running down his left arm, and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. The other 2 were younger, broader, with the kind of build that came from a lifetime of hard physical work. Garrett stepped off the porch, the rifle held loose but ready. Not threatening yet. Not until he had to be. The riders stopped 30 feet out. The man in the center swung down from his horse with deliberate, unhurried movements. This is private land, Garrett called out. State your business or move on. The man took 3 steps forward. We're here for the woman and child. Naira. She belongs to our tribe. People don't belong to anyone. Our ways are not your ways, white man. Maybe not, but this is my land, and on my land, people are free to make their own choices. The man's jaw tightened. She made her choice. She chose wrong. Now she must face the consequences. Looks to me like she made her choice and you didn't like it, Garrett said. That ain't the same as choosing wrong. One of the younger warriors shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward the rifle strapped to his back. Garrett's finger moved to his trigger. I wouldn't, he said quietly. The warrior froze. The older man studied Garrett for a long moment, and Garrett could see him calculating, weighing risks and possibilities. You don't understand what's at stake here, the man said finally. This is about honor, about family obligation. She has responsibilities she's trying to avoid. Her responsibility is to that little girl inside, Garrett replied. Everything else comes second. The child needs a father, a proper father from her own people. That girl has a father now, me. And unless Naira tells me different, neither of them are going anywhere. The man's expression darkened. You think claiming fatherhood changes anything? You think that makes you family? I think family ain't about blood, Garrett said. It's about who shows up, who stays, who chooses to care when it would be easier to walk away. The door behind him opened and Naira stepped out. She'd left Kaya inside but positioned herself beside Garrett close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Goyathle, she said, and Garrett heard the history and how she said the name. So this was him, the cousin who'd murdered her husband, the man who wanted to force her into marriage. You've caused enough of trouble, Goyathle said. It's time to end this foolishness and come home. I am home. That white man's house isn't your home. Your daughter needs stability. She needs to grow up among her people learning our ways. She needs safety, Naira said, and I won't find that with you. I've never raised a hand to a woman. Your first wife would say different if she could speak from her grave. The accusation landed like a physical blow. One of the younger warriors shifted uncomfortably, and Garrett realized whatever Naira was talking about wasn't just rumor. These men knew the truth. Goyathle's hand moved to his blade. You insult me with lies. I saw the bruises. Naira cut him off. I helped her hide them. So don't stand there and tell me you've never hurt anyone when we both know what you're capable of. You have no proof. I have truth. And witnesses. Naira pointed at the younger warriors. They were there. They saw you strike her when she burned your dinner. They heard her crying afterward. The 2 men looked at each other, then at the ground. Their silence was answer enough. "Is this true?" Garrett asked, his voice gone cold. Goyathle's eyes snapped to him. "This is not your concern, white man. You're on my land threatening people under my protection. That makes it my concern." "She is not yours to protect. She chose me," Garrett said. "That makes her mine, and I don't let anyone threaten what's mine." Goyathle took another step forward, and Garrett raised the rifle, not pointing it at anyone yet, just making his intention clear. "You need to leave," Garrett said quietly. "Now, before this becomes something none of us can take back. The council won't accept this. The council can come talk to me themselves if they have a problem. They will. And when they do, you'll regret interfering in matters you don't understand. Maybe, but today ain't that day. Today you're leaving my property before I give you a reason to stay permanently." Goyathle stared at him, and Garrett could see the calculation happening. 3 against 1, but the one had a rifle and higher ground. It wouldn't be clean. Someone would die. "This isn't over," Goyathle said finally. "I expect it ain't." The man mounted his horse, his movements stiff with suppressed rage. The 3 of them turned and rode back toward the hills, but Garrett didn't lower the rifle until they disappeared completely. Even then, he kept it close. Beside him, Naira was shaking. "You should sit down," Garrett said. "I need to check on Kaya." "She's fine. She's inside where it's safe. You, on the other hand, look like you're about to collapse." Naira didn't argue. She let him guide her to the chair on the porch, and she sank into it like her legs had been holding her up through pure will. "That was foolish," she said after a moment. "Which part?" "All of it. Standing up to them like that. You could have been killed." "So could you." "I'm used to the risk. You're not." Garrett leaned the rifle against the wall and crouched in front of her. "You think I didn't know what I was signing up for when we made our arrangement? I think you didn't know how serious it would get. Maybe not, but I'm learning fast." He met her eyes. "And I meant what I said out there. You chose me. That makes this my fight too." Naira looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. The walls she'd kept up the distance she'd maintained cracked slightly. "Why?" she asked, and the question held more weight than 3 letters should carry. "Why would you risk everything for people you barely know?" Garrett stood and moved to the edge of the porch, staring out at the land he'd worked alone for so long. "I told you about Emma," he said, "about how she died. What I didn't tell you was that I blamed myself. Thought if I'd just been there, just stayed home that day, instead of going to town, maybe things would have been different. That's not your fault. Maybe not, but it felt like it. Still does some days." He paused. "After she died, I spent 3 years avoiding people, avoiding connections. Figured if I didn't care about anyone, I couldn't fail them. And now I'm realizing that avoiding failure means avoiding life, and I'm tired of just existing." He turned to look at her. "You and Kaya, you gave me a reason to be something more than just a man waiting to die. That's worth fighting for." Naira stood and crossed to where he was standing. She didn't touch him, didn't cross that boundary they'd established, but she stood close enough that he could feel the heat radiating off her skin. "I chose well," she said quietly. "You don't know that yet." "Yes, I do." Inside, they heard Kaya crying, not the frightened crying from before, but the relieved kind, the kind that meant she knew the danger had passed. Naira moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Garrett. "They'll come back," she said, "with more men. And next time they won't just talk." "I know. Are you ready for that?" Garrett thought about it, about what it would mean to really commit to this, to defending these 2 people against a whole tribe if necessary, about crossing a line he couldn't uncross. "No," he admitted, "but I'll be ready when they get here." Naira nodded, then went inside to comfort her daughter. Garrett stayed on the porch, watching the eastern hills where Goyathle had disappeared. The sun was setting, painting everything orange and red, and he wondered how many sunsets he had left before this situation exploded into something neither of them could survive. But for now, for tonight, they were safe. And that would have to be enough. That night, Garrett didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness for movement that never came. Every sound made him tense the wind through the scrub brush, a coyote howling in the distance, the creak of the house settling. Any of them could have been riders coming back. Around midnight, the door opened behind him. "You should rest," Naira said. "Can't. They won't come back tonight. Goyathale will go to the council first, get permission for what he wants to do next." "How long does that take?" 2 days, maybe 3. She sat down beside him close enough that their shoulders touched. "He'll want it to be official. Want the elders to say he has the right to take me by force if necessary." "Will they give him that?" "My father will argue for it. He wants the marriage to happen, wants the alliance with Goyathale." Her voice went bitter. "And the rest of the council fears what will happen if they refuse. Goyathale has followers. Young men who believe the old ways are dying, and we need strong leaders to survive. And you? I think the old ways died the moment we started killing each other over them." She looked at him. "My husband believed in peace, believed we could find ways to live alongside white settlers without losing who we were. Goyathale called him weak, called him a traitor. That why Goyathale killed him. Part of it. The other part was land. Water rights." Naira's hands tightened in her lap. "My husband had claim to the best grazing territory in our region. When he died, that claim passed to me and Kaya. If I marry Goyathale, it passes to him. So this ain't just about tradition. It's about power." "It's always about power." She paused. "Even when they dress it up as honor or duty or keeping the family together underneath, it's always about who controls what." Garrett thought about that. About his own father who'd used duty and obligation to keep him and his sister in line after their mother died. About how many years it had taken him to realize that love shouldn't come with conditions. "I won't let him take you," he said. "You can't stop a whole tribe." "I can try. And die trying." "What good does that do, Kaya?" Naira turned to face him. "I appreciate what you did today, Garrett. More than you know. But I won't let you throw your life away for us." "That ain't your choice to make." "Yes, it is. I'm the one who got you into this." "No." Garrett set the rifle aside and looked at her. "I got myself into this the moment I gave Kaya water in that desert. The moment I brought you to my home. The moment I said yes to your arrangement." He held her gaze. "Those were my choices. And I don't regret any of them." Naira stared at him, and in the dim moonlight, he could see something working behind her eyes. Some decision being made. Then she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate and fierce, and tasted like fear and gratitude, and something else he couldn't quite name. Her hand came up to his face, fingers digging into his jaw like she was trying to anchor herself to something solid. Garrett froze for half a second, then kissed her back. His hand found the back of her neck, pulling her closer, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. There was no tribe coming, no threat hanging over them, no arrangement with boundaries and rules. There was just this, just them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Naira's eyes were wet. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't." Garrett brushed his thumb across her cheek. "Don't apologize for that. We had rules, boundaries. To hell with the boundaries." He rested his forehead against hers. "I've spent 3 years following rules that kept me safe and miserable. I'm done with that." Garrett. "I know this is complicated. I know you're scared and confused and probably not thinking straight, but I need you to know something." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "What I feel for you, it ain't obligation. It ain't just about protecting you and Kaya. It's more than that. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met. I know you'd do anything for your daughter. I know you make me want to be better than I am." He paused. "And I know that somewhere in the last week I stopped being alone. Because of you." Naira's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this arrangement we made, I want it to be real. Not just an agreement between strangers. Something more." He hesitated. "If you want that too." She kissed him again, softer this time, but no less intense. When she pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. "Yes," she said. "I want that too." They sat together on the porch until dawn, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Not talking, just being. And when the sun finally rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, Garrett felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. The next day, Garrett rode into town. Silver City wasn't much a main street with a dozen buildings, a general store, a saloon, and a church that saw more use as a meeting hall than a place of worship. But it had what he needed. He tied his horse outside the general store and went inside, nodding at Martha Sullivan behind the counter. She was a widow in her 60s who'd run the store since her husband died, and she knew everyone's business, whether they wanted her to or not. "Garrett Stone," she said, looking him up and down, like she could see everything that had happened in the past week written on his face. "Haven't seen you in months. Thought maybe you'd finally given up and moved back east." "Not quite yet, Martha." "What brings you in?" He pulled out the list Naira had made. "Need supplies. And chickens if you know anyone selling." Martha took the list, her eyebrows rising as she read. "This is a lot of food for one man." "Yeah, well, I ain't alone anymore." That got her attention. "You got yourself a wife." "Something like that." "Something like that. What's that supposed to mean?" Garrett met her eyes. "Means I've got a woman and a child living with me now. And before you start spreading stories, they needed help, and I gave it. That's all anyone needs to know." Martha studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Your business is your business." She started gathering items from the shelves. "Though I'll say this about time you stopped living like a hermit out there." "Yeah, well, life has a way of surprising you." "That it does." She set a sack of flour on the counter. "The chickens, you'll want to talk to Ben Morrison. He's got a whole flock, and he's always looking to sell. Lives about 2 miles north of here." "Appreciate it." "And Garrett." Martha paused. "If you need anything else, you come see me. I don't care what some folks in this town might say about Apache people. A child's a child and they all deserve a chance." Garrett felt something loosen in his chest. "Thank you, Martha." "Don't thank me, just take care of them." "I intend to." He left with 3 full sacks of supplies and a promise from Ben Morrison to deliver 6 chickens by the end of the week. On his way out of town, he passed the saloon and heard his name. Stone. He turned to see Deputy Marshal Frank Carson, stepping out of the saloon badge, glinting in the afternoon sun. Carson was a good man, fair and honest, but he wore the law like armor and didn't bend easy. "Frank. Heard something interesting today. Heard you got Apache staying at your place." Word traveled fast in small towns. "That's right." "That's a problem, Garrett?" "How so?" "We've got tensions with the tribes right now. Geronimo's still causing trouble down south and folks are nervous. Having Apache on your property, especially without permission from the territorial office, that makes people uncomfortable. They're not causing trouble. They're a woman and a child who needed help. I understand that, but the law's the law." Carson moved closer, lowering his voice. "I also heard some Apache warriors came by your place yesterday. That true?" "Yeah." "They threaten you. They came for the woman. I told them she was under my protection." Carson whistled low. "Garrett, that's a dangerous game you're playing. If the tribe decides to come back with more men, then I'll handle it." "You can't handle a whole tribe by yourself." "I ain't by myself. I've got them, and that's worth more than you might think." Carson studied him, then sighed. "Look, I can't stop you from helping people, but I need you to understand something. If this turns into a conflict between you and that tribe, the law can't protect you. The territorial government has enough problems with Apache relations without getting involved in a domestic dispute." "Understood. And if innocent people get hurt because of this, they won't." "You can't promise that." "Maybe not. But I can promise I'll do everything in my power to keep it from happening." Garrett held Carson's gaze. "That woman and her daughter, they've got nobody else. If I turn them away, they die in that desert. I can't live with that." Carson was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But Garrett, be careful. Whatever you think you're protecting, it might not be worth your life. It is to me." He rode back to the ranch with Carson's warning echoing in his head. The deputy was right. This was dangerous. But turning back wasn't an option anymore. Not when Naira looked at him like he was something worth believing in. Not when Kaya called him by name and smiled like he'd given her the world. When he got home, Kaya ran out to meet him. "You're back. I'm back." He swung down from his horse. "And I've got something for you." "What?" "Chickens, 6 of them, being delivered end of the week." Kaya's face lit up like he'd promised her the moon. "Really real chickens. Real chickens. You'll have to help me build a coop for them." "I can do that. I'll work really hard, I promise." She grabbed his hand and started pulling him toward the house, chattering about where they should put the coop and what they should name the chickens. Garrett let himself be led, marveling at how much life this child had brought to his property in just a week. Inside, Naira was kneading bread dough. She looked up when they entered, and the smile she gave him made his heart skip. "Successful trip?" she asked. "Got everything on the list, and chickens." "I heard. Kaya's very excited." "She's not the only one." He moved closer, keeping his voice low so Kaya wouldn't hear. "I ran into the deputy marshal. He knows you're here." Naira's hands stilled. And he warned me that if this turns into trouble, the law won't help. Said the territory doesn't want to get involved in Apache disputes. So we're on our own." "Looks like it." He reached out and touched her hand, flour dust coating his fingers. "That change anything for you?" "No." She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. "Does it change anything for you?" "Not a damn thing." That night, while Kaya slept, they made plans. Garrett showed Naira where he kept his spare rifles, taught her how to load and fire them. She showed him which plants in the area could be used as poison, which ones could heal, which ones could be thrown to create smoke that would confuse and disorient. "If they come during the day," Garrett said, "we've got the advantage. Open sight lines, nowhere to hide. But at night? At night we barricade ourselves inside. They won't risk burning the house with Kaya in it. That would make them look like monsters to their own people." "Don't be so sure. Goyatle cares more about power than appearances." "Then we shoot anyone who tries to get through that door." Naira nodded, but her expression was troubled. "Garrett, if it comes to that, if we have to kill members of my tribe, then we do what we have to do to survive. But after assuming we survive, we can never go back. I'll be marked as a traitor. Kaya will never be accepted by our people." "Is that what you want? To go back?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No. I want what we're building here. This life. This family." She looked at him. "But I'm afraid of what we'll have to destroy to keep it." "I know. Me too." He pulled her close. "But I'd rather fight for something real than live safe with nothing worth protecting." She pressed her face into his chest, and he felt her shoulders shake. Not crying exactly, just releasing something she'd been holding on to too tightly for too long. 2 days later, they came. Garrett spotted them at dawn, 7 riders this time moving in formation across the eastern ridge. Goyeth lay in the lead, flanked by warriors who looked ready for violence. But there was one more rider. Older, gray-haired, sitting his horse with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. Naira saw him and went pale. "My father." "That's Chief Nahilze." "Yes." Her voice shook. "He's come to bring me back himself." Garrett checked his rifle, his jaw set. "Then he's going to be disappointed." "Garrett, you don't understand. If my father commands it, the entire tribe will support him. This isn't just Goyethle anymore." "Don't matter. The answer's still no." "They'll kill you." "They can try." He stepped outside, rifle in hand. Naira followed, positioning herself beside him. Inside, he could hear Kaya crying quietly, and it made his blood run cold. That child had been through too much already. The riders stopped at the property line. Nahilze dismounted with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who knew he held all the power in this situation. "Naira," he called out. "Come here. We will speak." "I can hear you fine from where I am," Naira replied. Nahilze's expression hardened. "You disrespect your father. You disrespect your people. This ends now." "It ended when you tried to sell me to a murderer." "Goyethle is not a murderer." "Yes, he is, and you know it." Naira's voice rose. "You know he killed Ashki. You know he beat his first wife until she couldn't take it anymore. You know all of it, and you chose to look away because it was convenient." "Watch your tongue, daughter." "I'm not your daughter anymore. You made that choice when you sent me into the desert to die." Nahilze flinched, and Garrett saw something pass across his face. Shame, maybe, or regret. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come. "The council has decided," Nahilze said. "You will return. You will marry Goyathle. The child will be raised properly among her people." "No. This is not a request. And this is not your land." Garrett stepped forward. "You want to have this conversation, you do it on my terms. And my terms say she stays." Nahilze's eyes moved to him, cold and assessing. "You have no say in this, white man." "I've got every say. She chose me. That makes her mine to protect. She belongs to her people. She belongs to herself. And she chose to be here. With me. With our daughter." The word "our" hung in the air, and Garrett saw several of the warriors react. This wasn't just a white man harboring Apache refugees anymore. This was a man claiming family rights over another tribe's woman. That changed everything. Goyathle urged his horse forward, his face twisted with rage. "You dare claim what is mine? She was never yours. The elders promised her to me. The elders don't own her, neither do you." Garrett raised his rifle. "And if you take one more step toward this house, I'll put a bullet through your chest." "Garrett," Naira whispered. "Don't." "Too late for don't. This ends here." Goyathle reached for his own rifle, and suddenly 6 other weapons were pointed at Garrett. He was outgunned, outmanned, and out of time. But he didn't lower his rifle. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Shoot me. But I promise you, I'll take at least 3 of you with me before I go down, starting with him." He nodded at Goyethle. "So ask yourself if it's worth it. If taking one woman by force is worth losing 3 warriors." The silence stretched out taut as a bowstring. Then Nahilze raised his hand. "Lower your weapons." "Father," Goyethle started. "I said lower them." The warriors obeyed reluctantly. Goyethle looked like he wanted to argue, but one sharp look from Nahilze silenced him. The chief turned his attention back to Naira. "Is this truly what you want? To abandon your people for this man?" "I'm not abandoning my people," Naira said. "I'm saving my daughter from a man who would hurt her, from a system that values power over truth." She paused. "You taught me that, Father. You taught me to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. Why are you angry now that I'm doing exactly what you raised me to do? Nahilze's jaw worked. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, your mother would have done the same thing. The admission seemed to cost him something. His shoulders sagged slightly, and suddenly he looked older. Tired. She was stubborn like you, he continued. Refused to marry the man her family chose. Ran away with me instead, even though it meant leaving everything behind. He met Naira's eyes. I've spent 30 years grateful she made that choice, and 20 years trying to forget that I'm asking you to do what I would have hated if it were her. Then let me go, Naira said, and there were tears streaming down her face now. Please, Father, let me choose my own path. Nahilze looked at her, then at Garrett, then at the house where Kaya was hiding. Finally, he turned to Goyathle. The council's decision is reversed. Naira is free to make her own choice. What? Goyathle's face went purple with rage. You can't. I can. I am chief, and I say this matter is closed. But the land rights will remain with Naira and her daughter, as is proper. Nahilze mounted his horse. And if you challenge this decision, Goyathle, you will answer to me. Goyathle looked like he wanted to murder everyone present, but he kept his mouth shut. The other warriors began turning their horses, following their chief back toward tribal lands. Only Goyathle remained staring at Garrett with pure hatred. This isn't over, he said. Yeah, it is. You've made an enemy today. I've made a lot of those over the years. You'll have to get in line. Goyathle spurred his horse and rode off, and Garrett finally lowered his rifle. Beside him, Naira collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground, holding her, while she sobbed into his chest, relief and grief and exhaustion all pouring out at once. It's over, he said quietly. You're free. He let me go. My father let me go. Yeah, he did. I didn't think he would. I thought... She couldn't finish the sentence. The door burst open, and Kaya ran out, throwing herself at both of them. Mama Garrett, are you okay? We're okay, little one. Naira pulled her daughter close. We're all okay. They stood there together, the three of them holding on to each other, like they could keep the rest of the world at bay through sheer force of will. And maybe they could. Maybe that's what family was, not the people you were born to, but the ones you chose to stand with when everything else fell apart. That night, after Kaya had cried herself to sleep and the adrenaline had finally worn off, Garrett found Naira standing outside, staring up at the stars. Can't sleep, he asked. Too much in my head. He stood beside her, close enough to touch, but giving her space. You did good today. I almost got you killed. But you didn't. We're both still here. Because my father changed his mind. She turned to look at him. What if he hadn't? What if he'd let Goyathle? Then we would have fought, and maybe we would have died. But at least we would have died for something that mattered. He took her hand. I meant what I said before, Naira. I don't regret any of this. Even if it almost got you killed. Especially then. Because it means I've got something worth dying for again. He pulled her closer. I've got you. I've got Kaya. I've got a family. That's more than I've had in 3 years. She kissed him, then soft and slow, like they had all the time in the world, instead of just this moment. When they pulled apart, she smiled. So what happens now? Now we build those chicken coops. We plant that garden Kaya keeps talking about. We figure out how to be a family. He paused. And maybe eventually, we make it official. Official? Married, if you want. Naira's breath caught. You're asking me to marry you. Not asking, not yet. Just letting you know that's where my head's at. He touched her face. When you're ready. If you're ready. No pressure. I'm ready now. You sure? Because... She kissed him again, harder this time. I'm sure. I chose you once already, didn't? I might as well make it permanent. Garrett laughed, and it felt good. It felt right. Then I guess we're getting married. I guess we are. They stood together under the stars, two people who'd found each other against all odds. Two people who'd chosen each other when they could have walked away. And in the morning, they'd start building the life they'd fought so hard to protect. But tonight, they just held each other and let that be enough. The chickens arrived 3 days later, and with them came the first real test of whether this family they were building could actually work. Ben Morrison pulled up in his wagon with 6 hens clucking in wooden crates, took one look at Nyra standing on the porch, and his expression went cold. Didn't know you were harboring Indian stone. Garrett stepped forward, keeping his voice level. Didn't know I needed your permission about who lives on my property. Don't. But I got a right to know who I'm doing business with. Then you're doing business with a man who keeps his word and pays fair price. That enough for you? Morrison worked his jaw, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, he spat into the dirt. Money's money, I suppose. Long as it spends the same. It does. They unloaded the chickens in tense silence. Kaya watched from the doorway, her earlier excitement dimmed by Morrison's hostility. When the man finally drove away, she came out slowly. He didn't like us, she said quietly. No, he didn't. Garrett crouched down to her level. And he ain't gonna be the last person who feels that way. You need to know that now. Why do they hate us? Because people fear what they don't understand, and fear makes folks mean. He touched her shoulder. But that ain't your problem to fix. You just keep being who you are, and eventually they'll see what I see. What do you see? A brave little girl who survived things most grown men couldn't handle. A girl who's gonna grow up strong and kind despite everything working against her. He stood. Now come on, we've got chicken coops to build. They worked through the afternoon, Garrett showing Kaya how to measure and cut wood, while Nyra prepared the evening meal. The physical labor felt good, purposeful, like they were building something that would last. But around sunset, while Garrett was hammering the final nails into the coop frame, Kaya suddenly went still. What's wrong? He asked. I heard something. He stopped hammering, listening. At first there was nothing but wind, and the chickens settling into their temporary crates. Then he heard it, 2 hoofbeats coming fast from the south. Get inside, he said quietly. Is it them again? Don't know, but go, now. Kaya ran for the house while Garrett grabbed his rifle from where he'd propped it against the fence. The rider came into view a minute later, alone, pushing his horse hard, dust rising behind him. Not Apache. White man, middle-aged, wearing a badge. Deputy Marshal Carson pulled his horse to a stop, breathing hard. Garrett, we got a problem. What kind of problem? The kind where Goyathle showed up in town an hour ago with 5 warriors saying you stole his woman and he wants her back. Carson dismounted. He's telling everyone you forced her to stay that you're keeping her and the child against their will. That's a damn lie. I know it is, but he's stirring up trouble and people are listening. Folks in town are already nervous about Apache, and now Goyathle's giving them a reason to act on it. Carson moved closer. There's talk of forming a group to come out here, make sure the woman and child are safe. Safe. Garrett's grip tightened on his rifle. She's safest right here, away from the man who murdered her husband. You got proof of that? Nyra's testimony. That ain't proof, Garrett. That's a widow's accusation against a tribal leader. No judge would hear that case, and you know it. Carson pulled off his hat, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm trying to help you here, but if a dozen armed men show up at your door demanding to see the woman, I can't stop them. Legally, they got a right to check on her welfare. And when she tells them she wants to stay, will they believe her, or will they think you've got a gun to her head? Carson put his hat back on. You're in a bad spot here, worse than you realize. The door opened and Nyra stepped out. What's happening? Town's getting worked up, Garrett said. Goyathle's been spreading lies, saying I forced you to stay here. Naira's face went pale. He's trying to turn your own people against you. Smart play, Carson said. If white settlers come to rescue you from a white man, Goyathli looks like he's got the moral high ground and the law on his side. So what do we do? Garrett asked. You let me bring her into town. Let her make a statement in front of witnesses that she's here by choice. That way, when folks come asking questions, we got something official to point to. No, Garrett said immediately. It's the only way to... I said no. Soon as she sets foot in that town, Goyathli will have a dozen chances to take her. In the street, in your office, anywhere, she's not protected. I can protect her. Against how many? You think you can stop a determined man and his warriors from grabbing her if they really want to? Carson's silence was answer enough. Then she stays here, Garrett said, where I can keep her safe. Garrett? Naira started. No, I already let your tribe almost take you once. I ain't giving anyone else that chance. This is different. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it's the same threat wearing different clothes. Naira moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. If I don't go, they will come here. And when they do, you'll be outnumbered and outgunned. At least in town there are witnesses, laws, things that might keep Goyathli from doing something stupid. Or things that might give him exactly the opening he needs. It's a risk either way. She touched his face. But this risk gives us a chance to end this peacefully. The other way ends with you dead and me taken anyway. Garrett wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the house and dare anyone to try taking her. But she was right, damn her. She was right, and he hated it. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. But I'm coming with you. And if anyone so much as looks at you wrong, you'll start a war you can't win. Carson stepped between them. Listen to me, both of you. This works only if everyone stays calm. That means no threats, no guns drawn unless absolutely necessary. Understood. Understood, Naira said. Garrett said nothing. Garrett. Fine. Understood. Good. We leave at first light. That gives us time to get there and back before dark. Carson mounted his horse. And Garrett. Bring that girl too. Let folks see she's healthy and happy. Makes it harder for Goyathli to claim you're hurting them. After Carson left, Garrett and Naira stood in the gathering darkness, neither speaking. Finally, Garrett said, I don't like this. I know. Something feels wrong. I know that too. She leaned against him. But we don't have better options. We could run. Take Kaya and head west, disappear into California or Oregon territory. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Never settling down, never building anything permanent. She shook her head. That's not living. That's just surviving. At least you'd be alive. What good is being alive if I'm not free? She pulled back to look at him. I didn't leave my tribe and risk everything just to spend my life running scared. I want roots, a home, a future where Kaya can grow up without fear. And if tomorrow takes that away, then at least we tried. She kissed him softly. At least we fought for something real, instead of accepting what others decided for us. That night, Garrett taught Kaya how to load and fire his spare rifle. She was small, the weapon almost too big for her, but she learned quickly. Why do I need to know this? She asked. Because tomorrow, your mama and I are going into town. You're coming with us, but I want you to know how to protect yourself if something goes wrong. What could go wrong? Garrett met Naira's eyes across the room. Nothing, probably, but it's always better to be prepared. Kaya practiced until she could load the rifle in under a minute, her small hands working with surprising efficiency. When she finally put it down, she looked up at Garrett with solemn eyes. Are we going to be okay? He wanted to lie, wanted to tell her everything would be fine and they'd all come home safe. But she deserved better than comfortable lies. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure we are, he said instead. That's the best promise I can give you. She nodded, seeming to accept this. Then quietly, "Can I call you Papa now?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He looked at Naira, who was watching with tears in her eyes, then back at Kaya. "You sure about that? You said to call you what feels right. And Papa feels right." She moved closer. "Is that okay?" Garrett pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. "Yeah, little one. That's more than okay." She wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "I love you, Papa. I love you too." Over her shoulder, he saw Naira crying silently, and he knew she understood what this meant. Kaya had just made their family official in the only way that really mattered. They rode into Silver City at mid-morning, Garrett on his horse with Kaya in front of him, Naira on the horse he'd borrowed from Ben Morrison at premium cost. Carson met them at the edge of town, his expression grim. "There's already a crowd gathered at the marshal's office. Word spread fast that you were coming." "How many?" 20, maybe 30. Mix of curious folks and troublemakers. Carson looked at Naira. "You ready for this?" "No, but let's do it anyway." They rode slowly down the main street, and Garrett felt every eye on them. People stopped what they were doing to stare. Some faces showed curiosity, others hostility. More than a few showed fear. Outside the marshal's office, the crowd parted reluctantly. Garrett helped Naira down first, then Kaya, keeping both of them close. "She don't look kidnapped to me," someone in the crowd said loudly. "Course she don't. He's got her scared into compliance," another voice countered. "That ain't how scared looks," a woman's voice said, Martha Sullivan, pushing her way through. "I've seen scared women. That one's standing tall." "Stay out of this, Martha." "I will not. You men are working yourselves up over nothing." Inside the office, Carson sat behind his desk, while Garrett, Naira, and Kaya stood. The crowd pressed against the windows, trying to hear. "All right," Carson said. "For the record, state your name and whether you're here of your own free will." "My name is Naira. I am here because I choose to be. No one forced me to come to Garrett Stone's ranch, and no one is keeping me there against my will." "And the child?" "My daughter Kaya, also here by choice." "You understand that members of your tribe have claimed Garrett Stone took you by force. I understand that Goyathlai is a liar who wants to control me. He has spread these lies to turn white people against the man protecting us." A murmur ran through the crowd outside. "Why do you need protecting?" Carson asked. "Because Goyathlai murdered my husband and tried to force me into marriage. When I refused, he convinced the tribal elders to exile me, hoping the desert would kill me and solve his problem. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, and I will say it to anyone who asks." The door burst open, and Goyathlai strode in 5 warriors behind him. The crowd scattered to let them through. "She lies," Goyathlai said, his voice carrying. "She dishonors her people with these false claims." "Then why are you here?" Naira turned to face him. "If I'm lying, why do you care what I say? Because you corrupt our children with your white man's influence. Because you betray everything our tribe stands for. I betray nothing. You're the traitor. You killed my husband for land and power, and now you want to silence me before I can prove it. You have no proof. I have witnesses. Your brother Dakota was there the day Ashkey died. He saw you arguing with him about water rights. He saw you threaten him." One of the warriors behind Goyathlai shifted uncomfortably, a younger man with Goyathlai's features. Dakota clearly. "Is this true?" Carson asked. Dakota's eyes darted between Goyathlai and Naira. He says nothing." Goyathlai cut him off. "This is tribal business. Your law has no authority here." "Wrong," Carson said. "Murder is murder, whether it happens on tribal land or not. If this man has evidence of a crime, I need to hear it." "He has no evidence because there was no crime. My cousin died in a hunting accident. That is the truth, accepted by our elders." "Then let your brother speak for himself." All eyes turned to Dakota. The young man looked terrified, caught between loyalty to his brother and the truth he clearly knew. "Tell them," Naira said quietly. Tell them what you saw. Dakota, Goyathle warned. Please, Naira pressed. You have a chance to do the right thing, to honor Ashki's memory with truth instead of silence. Dakota's throat worked. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, there was an argument. About land. Ashki wanted to share water rights with white settlers. Goyathle said it would weaken us, make us dependent. And Ashki said tradition didn't matter if our children were dying of thirst. Dakota's voice grew stronger. He said Goyathle cared more about power than people, that he would destroy the tribe to rule it. You dare! Goyathle reached for Dakota, but two of the other warriors grabbed his arms, holding him back. Keep talking, Carson said. The next day we went hunting. Ashki and I were tracking deer when an arrow came from behind. It hit Ashki in the leg right through the artery. Dakota's voice broke. He bled out in minutes, and when I looked back I saw my brother lowering his bow. The silence in the office was absolute. That's a lie, Goyathle roared. He's lying to save the white man's whore. Garrett moved before he could think, his fist connecting with Goyathle's jaw, with enough force to send the man staggering backward. The warriors released Goyathle and reached for their weapons, but Carson already had his gun drawn. Nobody moves, the deputy marshal shouted. Garrett stood over Goyathle, his hands shaking with rage. You call her that again, and I'll kill you right here, law or no law. Goyathle spat blood. You think you've won. You think one traitor's testimony changes anything. It changes everything, Carson said. Dakota, you willing to swear to this statement? I am. Then Goyathle, you're under arrest for murder. You have no authority over Apache people. I've got authority over murderers in my territory, and testimony from a witness. Carson motioned to the crowd. Someone get me rope. We're taking him to the territorial prison until a judge can hear this case. The next few minutes were chaos. Goyathle fought against the men restraining him, screaming threats in Apache and English. His warriors looked uncertain, unwilling to attack the deputy marshal, but equally unwilling to abandon their leader. In the confusion, one of the warriors, a man Garrett hadn't paid attention to, slipped toward Naira. Garrett saw the movement a second too late. The warrior grabbed Naira's arm, pulling her toward the door. No! Kaya screamed. Garrett lunged, but another warrior blocked his path. His hand went to his gun, but in the crowded office, he couldn't risk a shot hitting someone else. Naira fought, driving her elbow into the warrior's stomach, but he held on. They were nearly to the door when a shot rang out. Everyone froze. Martha Sullivan stood in the doorway. Her late husband's rifle pointed at the ceiling, smoke still rising from the barrel. Nobody's taking anybody anywhere, she said calmly. Not on my watch. The warrior hesitated, looking between Martha and the crowd of townspeople now filling the street behind her, many of them armed. Let her go! Carson ordered, his gun now pointed at the warrior. Last chance. The warrior released Naira and stepped back, hands raised. Garrett pushed past the other warrior and pulled Naira close, checking her for injuries. You okay? I'm fine. Where's Kaya? Here, Mama. The girl appeared from behind the desk where she'd taken cover. I'm okay. Carson and 3 other men finally got Goyathle in restraints. As they dragged him toward the door, he looked at Naira with pure hatred. This isn't over, he said. Even behind bars, I have friends, followers. They will come for you. Then they'll have to go through me, Garrett said. And me, Martha added. And me, said another voice, Ben Morrison, stepping forward from the crowd. I don't care much for Indian Stone, but I care less for murderers and kidnappers. You need help protecting your family. You got it. One by one, other voices joined. Not everyone, plenty of faces in the crowd still showed hostility or fear, but enough. Enough to make Garrett's throat tight and his eyes burn. Appreciate it, he managed. They escorted Goyathle to the small jail cell behind the marshal's office, his warriors following reluctantly. Carson made it clear they could stay in town, but any attempt to free their leader would be met with force. When it was finally over, when the crowd had dispersed and the warriors had retreated to camp outside town, Carson turned to Garrett. "This is going to cause problems with the tribe. You know that, right?" "Yeah, I know." "The territorial government's going to have to get involved. There'll be investigations, maybe even military presence if things escalate." "We'll handle it." "Will you?" Carson studied him. "Because you just made yourself the most visible white man in Apache territory. That's dangerous. More dangerous than watching innocent people suffer." "Sometimes, yeah." Carson sighed. "But I respect what you're doing. Not many men would put themselves on the line like this. I ain't doing it to be noble. I'm doing it because it's right." "Same thing, isn't it?" "Maybe. Maybe not." Garrett was too tired to figure out the difference. They rode back to the ranch in silence. Kaya fell asleep against Garrett's chest, exhausted by the day's events. Naira rode beside them, her expression distant. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked quietly. "That I've destroyed your peace, your safety, your standing in this community." "You didn't destroy anything? You gave me a reason to care about those things again. But now you're a target. Because of me. I've been a target before. Survived then, I'll survive now." He shifted Kaya's weight. "Besides, we're in this together, remember? That was the arrangement." Naira smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The arrangement's gotten a lot more complicated than either of us planned." "Yeah, well, best things usually do." When they got home, Garrett put Kaya to bed, while Naira checked the perimeter, making sure no one had visited while they were gone. Everything was as they'd left it, the half-built chicken coop, the supplies scattered around the house, locked and secure. But somehow, it felt different. Like they'd crossed some invisible line in town, and now there was no going back to the quiet life Garrett had been building before they arrived. That night, lying beside Naira in the darkness, Garrett asked the question that had been haunting him all day. "Do you regret it, choosing me?" She was quiet for so long, he thought maybe she'd fallen asleep. Then, "No. I regret what it's cost you. But I don't regret the choice itself. Even if it gets me killed. Especially then. Because it means you'll have died for something that mattered instead of wasting away alone in this house pretending that's living." He pulled her closer. "You're brutal when you're honest, you know that. You needed brutal. You'd been lying to yourself too long." "Yeah, I suppose I had." They fell silent again, but this time it was comfortable. The silence of two people who didn't need words to understand each other. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance. The chickens rustled in their temporary pen. And somewhere in the darkness, Garrett knew threats were gathering Goyathle's followers, tribal politics, territorial tensions. All of it building towards something he couldn't quite see yet, but could feel coming like a storm on the horizon. But tonight, in this moment, he had his family safe under his roof. He had Naira's warmth beside him, and Kaya's quiet breathing in the next room. And that was enough. It had to be. Morning came too early, and with it came riders. Garrett was up before dawn checking the perimeter out of habit when he saw the dust rising from the east. Not 3 or 7 this time. More. At least a dozen, maybe more behind them. He ran back to the house, his heart hammering. "Naira, get up. We got company." She was awake instantly, reaching for the rifle he'd left beside the bed. "How many?" "Too many." Kaya sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Papa, stay inside, little one. No matter what happens, you stay inside and keep quiet." "I'm scared." "I know. But your mama and we're gonna handle this. Okay." She nodded, but her lip trembled. Naira knelt beside her daughter. "Remember what we talked about? If anything happens, you go out the back window and run to the rocks. Hide there until it's safe. But no arguments, promise me." "I promise, Mama." Garrett positioned himself by the front window, rifle ready. Naira took the other window. They waited in tense silence as the riders approached. But as they got closer, Garrett realized something was wrong. These weren't warriors coming for a fight. They were families, men, women, children. Elder Nahilzai rode at the front, his expression weary. "Hold your fire," Garrett said. "Something else is happening here." They went outside slowly, weapons lowered but ready. The group stopped 20 feet from the house, and Nahilzai dismounted. "We mean no harm," the chief said. "Then why are you here?" Nahilzai looked at his people, then back at Garrett. "Goyathle's followers attacked our camp last night. They burned supplies, killed 2 elders who spoke against him. They say if we don't free Goyathle and return Naira to the tribe, they will continue attacking." Naira stepped forward. "How many followers?" 15, maybe 20. Young warriors who believe Goyathle's vision of driving out white settlers and returning to the old ways. Nahilzai's voice was heavy. "I tried to stop this, tried to make them see reason, but they no longer listen to an old man who they believe has grown soft." "What do you want from us?" Garrett asked. "Sanctuary, for those who refuse to follow Goyathle's path." Nahilzai gestured to the families behind him. 23 people, women, children, elders. If we stay on tribal lands, his followers will force us to choose sides or die. And you think I can protect 23 people against 20 warriors? No, I think together we might survive what's coming. Nahilzai met his eyes. Goyathle's followers will not stop with our camp. They will come here next. They will try to free him and kill anyone who stands in their way. That includes you, Garrett Stone. Let them come. Alone you will die. With us, you have a chance." The chief paused. "And we have nowhere else to go. The territorial government has made it clear they will not protect Apache people caught in tribal disputes. We are, as you white men say, on our own." Garrett looked at the family's frightened faces, exhausted children, elders who looked like they'd lost everything. He thought about turning them away, about keeping his family safe by staying small and hidden. Then he thought about what Naira had said, about choosing to fight for something real instead of just surviving. "All right," he said, "you can stay, but there's gonna be rules. Everyone works, everyone contributes. And if Goyathle's followers come, everyone fights who's able." "Agreed. And one more thing." Garrett looked at Nahilzai. "Your daughter and I are getting married. Properly. With witnesses and everything official. You got a problem with that?" A slight smile crossed the chief's weathered face. "My daughter chose you. That makes you my son whether there's a ceremony or not. But yes, we should make it official." He turned to his people. "We have a wedding to prepare." The next 3 days were chaos. 23 people suddenly living on Garrett's small ranch meant every inch of space was occupied. They set up temporary shelters using materials from Garrett's barn and supplies the families had managed to save. The children ran everywhere, their voices filling the silence Garrett had grown so used to. The women organized cooking and water distribution with efficient precision, and Garrett found himself at the center of something he'd never expected: a community. Martha Sullivan showed up the second day with 3 wagons full of supplies. "Heard you were harboring refugees," she said, not unkindly. "Figured you could use some help." "Martha, I can't pay for all this." "Didn't ask you to. Consider it a wedding gift." She handed him a list. "Also brought you this. It's a petition signed by 47 citizens of Silver City stating that you're providing humanitarian aid and should be left alone to do so." "Why would you do this?" "Because somebody's got to stand up for what's right. Might as well be us." She climbed back onto her wagon. "Besides, you're gonna need friends when those warriors show up, and you got more than you think." Ben Morrison came the next day with lumber and tools. "Heard you're building shelters. Could use an extra set of hands." "Thought you didn't like Indians," Garrett said. "I don't, but I like bullies even less, and men who attack women and children." He spat. "That ain't right no matter who's doing it." They worked together building proper structures, and Garrett noticed Ben treating the Apache families with rough respect. Not friendly exactly, but fair. It was a start. On the 3rd day, Deputy Marshal Carson rode out with news. "Judge is coming next week to hear the case against Goyathle. But we got a problem." "What kind?" The kind where his followers broke him out of jail last night, killed my deputy in the process. Carson's face was grim. They're out there somewhere probably planning their next move, and my guess is they're coming here. How long do we have? Day, maybe 2. They'll want to regroup first, gather more weapons. He looked around at the camp taking shape. This what I think it is. Refugees. Folks who didn't want any part of Goyathle's war. You're building a target, Garrett. You know that. I'm building a family. There's a difference. That night Garrett and Naira stood watch while the camp slept. The wedding was planned for the next evening. Nahilze had insisted they needed something hopeful to hold on to before the violence came. You scared? Naira asked. Terrified. Good. Fear keeps you alert. She loaded her rifle with practiced ease. My father taught me that. He said a warrior without fear is a warrior who dies stupid. Your father's a wise man. He's a tired man, a good man who made bad choices because he thought he was preserving something important. She paused. But he's trying to make it right now. That counts for something. Yeah, it does. They fell silent, listening to the night sounds. Then Naira said, If we don't survive this, we will. But if we don't, I want you to know something. She turned to face him. These past weeks with you building this life, it's been the freest I've ever felt, even with everything hanging over us, even knowing what might come. I've never felt more alive. Garrett pulled her close. We're gonna survive. We're gonna get married tomorrow, and we're gonna watch Kaya grow up, and we're gonna get old and gray, arguing about chickens and whose turn it is to cook. Promise. Promise. The wedding happened at sunset with the whole camp gathered. Nahilze performed the ceremony using a blend of Apache tradition and Christian prayer that somehow felt right for what they were building here. Something new, something that honored the past while creating space for the future. Kaya stood beside them beaming. When Garrett and Naira exchanged vows, she whispered loudly, Does this mean we're a real family now? We were always a real family, Garrett said. This just makes it official. Good, because I like being your daughter. And I like being your papa. They kissed while the camp cheered, and for one perfect moment, everything else disappeared. There was no threat coming, no violence waiting. There was just this two people choosing each other, choosing to build something beautiful in the middle of chaos. The celebration lasted into the night. People shared food, told stories, sang songs in Apache and English. Children ran around playing, while adults talked and laughed. And Garrett realized this was what he'd been missing for 3 years. Not just a wife or a family, but community. Connection. The messy, complicated, beautiful reality of being part of something bigger than yourself. Around midnight, one of the young warriors standing watch whistled sharply. Everyone went silent. Riders, he called out. Coming from the south. Garrett grabbed his rifle. How many? I count 20, maybe more behind. Everyone to positions, women and children to the center, men on the perimeter. He turned to Nahilze. This is it. I know. The old chief picked up his own rifle. I'm too old for this, you know. You're doing fine. I'm about to shoot at members of my own tribe. That's not fine, but it's necessary. He moved toward the perimeter. For what it's worth, I'm glad my daughter chose you. So am I. The riders stopped just outside rifle-range silhouettes against the moonlit desert. Goyathle's voice carried across the distance. Nahilze, you harbor traitors and hide behind a white man. Is this what you've become? I protect my people, Nahilze shouted back. As a chief should. You attack women and children. You murder elders. You are the traitor, not I. I am the future. You are the past, clinging to weakness and compromise. Goyathle urged his horse forward slightly. Send out Naira and the white man. Let us settle this properly. The rest of you will be spared. No one is being sent anywhere, Garrett called out. You want them, you go through all of us. Then you all die. Maybe. But we'll take a good number of you with us. You ready for that Goyathle, ready to sacrifice your followers for pride? There was a long pause. Then, you should have stayed out of Apache business, white man. Your interference has cost you everything. No. Your violence cost me nothing. But it gave me everything that matters. Garrett looked at Naira, then at Kaya, hiding behind one of the shelters. Gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to fight. So come on if you're coming. We're ready. Goyathle raised his arm, and suddenly arrows were flying through the darkness. People screamed and dove for cover. Garrett returned fire, his rifle crack echoing across the desert. The battle was brutal and close. Goyathle's warriors charged the perimeter, trying to break through at weak points. But the defenders held fighting with the desperation of people protecting their families. Garrett lost track of time. He just kept firing, reloading, firing again. Beside him, Naira fought with cold efficiency, every shot finding its target. Around them, Apache fought Apache families against warriors, tradition against violence. Then Garrett saw Goyathle breaking through, heading straight for where Kaya was hiding. No! He ran, tackling Goyathle off his horse. They hit the ground hard, rolling. Goyathle got on top, his blade flashing toward Garrett's throat. A shot rang out. Goyathle jerked his eyes, going wide. He looked down at the blood spreading across his chest, then back toward where the shot had come from. Dakota stood there, rifle still raised, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, brother, but it had to end. Goyathle collapsed sideways, his breathing shallow. You chose them over family. No, I chose truth over lies. Dakota lowered his rifle. And I chose peace over your war. Goyathle tried to speak again, but no words came. A moment later, he went still. The fighting stopped almost immediately. Goyathle's followers, seeing their leader dead, began lowering their weapons. Some ran, some surrendered. A few just stood there, looking lost. Nahilzai walked forward slowly, surveying the damage. 3 of the camp defenders were dead, 5 wounded. On Goyathle's side, 8 dead, including their leader, several more wounded. It's over, the chief said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. No more fighting, no more death. Those who wish to return to tribal lands go with my blessing. Those who wish to stay here, you are welcome. He paused. But this ends now. We choose peace. One by one, Goyathle's followers either rode away or laid down their weapons in surrender. By dawn, the battle was truly over. Garrett found Naira kneeling beside one of the fallen defenders, an elderly woman who'd taken an arrow trying to protect children. Naira was crying silently, her hands covered in blood. I'm sorry, he said, kneeling beside her. Her name was Desba. She taught me plant medicine when I was young. She didn't have to fight. She was too old. Naira's voice broke. But she fought anyway, to protect us. She was brave. She was kind, and kindness got her killed. No, violence got her killed. But her kindness saved those children she was protecting. He touched Naira's shoulder. That matters. That counts. They buried the dead at sunset, defenders and attackers together, because Nahilzai insisted that in death all warriors deserved respect. It was a painful ceremony full of grief and exhausted relief. When it was over, Dakota approached Garrett. I want to thank you. For what? For giving me the courage to do the right thing. Watching you stand up for truth when it cost you everything. It made me realize I could too. You saved my life. Saved all our lives. Garrett extended his hand. Thank you. Dakota shook it firmly. What happens now? Now we rebuild. We heal. We figure out how to live together. Apache and white, traditional and new. Garrett looked around at the camp, at the mix of faces and families. We build something better than what came before. The next weeks passed in a blur of construction and recovery. Deputy Marshal Carson, came with territorial officials who seemed stunned to find Apache and white settlers working together peacefully. After investigation and testimony, they officially recognized Garrett's land as a sanctuary zone and warned against any further violence from either side. Martha Sullivan organized regular supply runs from Silver City. More settlers started visiting cautiously at first, then with growing frequency. Trade began Apache crafts and knowledge for settler goods and tools. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still mistrust on both sides. But it was something. It was a start. 3 months after the battle, Naira woke Garrett in the middle of the night. "Something's wrong," she said, her hand on her stomach. It took him a second to understand. Then he saw her expression, not fear, but joy mixed with pain. The baby's coming. They'd known she was pregnant for 6 weeks, though Garrett suspected she'd known longer and just hadn't told him. Now, in the darkness of their bedroom, with Kaya sleeping in the next room, and the camp peaceful outside, their new life was literally about to begin. The birth was hard. Naira labored through the night with the camp's midwives helping Garrett, holding her hand and feeling completely useless. Kaya woke up halfway through and refused to leave, sitting in the corner, watching with wide, serious eyes. Just before dawn, when the sky was turning that perfect shade of purple that promised a new day, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, tiny fists waving, and Garrett felt something break open in his chest. All the grief he'd carried for 3 years, all the loss and guilt and pain, it didn't disappear. But it made space for something else. Something better. "He's perfect," Naira whispered, exhausted and radiant. "He is." Garrett touched his son's tiny hand, marveling at the fierce grip. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking. Ashkey, after his father." She paused. "And Stone, after yours." "Ashkey Stone." Garrett tested the name. "I like it. Honors both sides of who he is. Who we all are now." Naira looked around the room at Kaya, curled up asleep in the chair, at Garrett, holding their newborn son, at the door, where Nihilze waited to meet his newest grandchild. Not Apache, not white, something new. "Something better," Garrett agreed. 6 months later, on a warm afternoon with Ashkey sleeping in Naira's arms, and Kaya teaching Apache children and settler children how to tend the chickens together, Garrett stood on his porch and looked at what they'd built. The camp had grown into a proper settlement. 20 structures now, with more being planned. A school where children learned in both English and Apache. A trading post where settlers and Apache did business as equals. A community center where disputes were settled with words instead of violence. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still people on both sides who resented what they'd built here. But it was real. It was working. Martha Sullivan rode up waving. "Got news from the territorial governor. They're officially recognizing this place as a township. You'll need to register a name." "A name? Can't just call it Garrett's Place forever." She grinned. "Though I suppose you could." Garrett looked at Naira, who'd come out to stand beside him. "What do you think?" "I think." She considered. "I think we should call it Haven, because that's what it is. A safe place for people who don't fit anywhere else." "Haven." Garrett tried it out. "Yeah, I like that." "Then Haven it is," Martha said. "I'll send word to the governor's office." She looked around, her expression softening. "You've done something remarkable here, you know. Given people hope when they didn't have any left." "Wasn't just me." "No, but you started it. You looked at that woman and child dying in the desert and decided they mattered. Everything else came from that one choice." After Martha left, Garrett put his arm around Naira. "You ever regret it? That day when you chose me?" "Every day," she said, then smiled at his expression. "I regret that I didn't choose you sooner, that I wasted so much time being afraid and angry when I could have been here building this with you. We got here eventually. That's what matters." "Yes, we did." She leaned against him, watching Kaya chase chickens with a mix of Apache and settler children, their laughter rising into the clear New Mexico sky. We built something that will outlast us. Something our children and grandchildren will inherit. A home. More than that. A future where they don't have to choose between who they are and who they love. Where being different isn't dangerous. She turned to look at him. That's what you gave me, Garrett. Not just safety or shelter, but the freedom to imagine a better world and the courage to build it. He kissed her softly. We built it together. Yes, we did. That evening, as the sun set over Haven and families gathered for the communal meal they shared every week, Garrett stood with his wife and children and thought about the man he'd been 4 months ago. Alone, broken, waiting to die. And he thought about the choice Naira had made that day, pressing her hand to his face and saying words that had terrified and saved him in equal measure. I choose you to be the father. Not a question, not a plea, a declaration, a decision that had changed everything. She'd chosen him when he'd given up on being chosen. And in doing so, she'd given him a reason to choose life again, to choose hope, to choose love. Kaya ran up breathless and happy. Papa, can I help serve dinner? Course you can, little one. She took his hand and pulled him toward the cooking fires, chattering about her day. Naira followed with Ashki, and Nahilze walked beside them, proud and peaceful. And Garrett realized this was what he'd been searching for all along without knowing it. Not the absence of pain or the promise of safety, but the presence of people worth fighting for, worth living for, worth choosing every single day. Some decisions change everything in a single breath. Naira's choice had changed his life, and his choice to say yes had changed hers. Together, they'd built something neither of them could have created. Alone, a family, a community, a home where love mattered more than blood, and choice mattered more than tradition. Haven wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was theirs. And it was exactly what the broken rancher and the desperate widow had needed all along. A place where being chosen meant choosing back. Where family wasn't about who you were born to, but who you decided to become. Garrett Stone had spent 3 years waiting to die. Now he was finally learning to live. And it had all started with a dying child's thirst, a woman's impossible gamble, and 3 words that had rewritten everything he thought he knew about second chances. I choose you. The most powerful words he'd ever heard, and the ones that had saved them all.